So, we've been diving into the wild adventures of Paul's travels as told in the book of Acts, and it's pretty amazing how much secular history backs up Luke's accuracy and attention to detail. The guy was a top-notch historian. Now, if you haven't caught up on the past few videos, be sure to check out the playlist at the end screen to get the full picture. For now, let's dive into even more details. So, in Acts 22, things are getting pretty heated for Paul. He's accused of causing trouble at the temple, and he's giving his defense. The crowd goes from intently listening to him to straight up demanding his removal from the earth the moment he drops the word Gentile. It's chaos. People shouting, throwing off their cloaks, and tossing dust into the air. Then the Roman commander steps in and decides to take Paul into custody. His plan? Give Paul a good flogging and figure out why everyone's so worked up. But just as they're about to lay into him, Paul drops a bombshell. He says, "Hey, isn't it illegal to flog a Roman citizen without a trial?" Well, you can imagine the shock. The centurion rushes off to tell the commander, boss, this guy's a Roman citizen. So the commander's like, hold on, Paul, you're a Roman citizen? Paul's like, yep. But then the commander drops a bomb of his own. I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship. Paul's response, well, I didn't. I was born with it. And just like that, everything changes. The commander realizes he's made a huge mistake, being about to illegally beat a Roman citizen and all. Panic sets in, and they back off real quick. Now, that's a neat story. But what's even cooler are the historical nuggets that back up Luke's accuracy here. You see, during that era, citizenships were initially sold for a fortune, all to fill the emperor's coffers. But then, like magic, they started handing them out like a dollar menu special. It was a total political farce. You see, during Claudius's reign, the prices nosedive. Dio Cassius, a historian of ancient Rome, dishes the dirt on Emperor Claudius's wife, Messalina, and her crew, who were peddling citizenships like they were going out of style. Dio wryly remarks that you could possibly trade in a couple of chipped coffee mugs and get a Roman citizenship. You can practically hear the commander's exasperated sigh as he recalls likely shelling out a fortune for his own citizenship. But what's really interesting is how subtle and natural this whole conversation seems. And here's the kicker. This quick passage shows us that Acts wasn't likely penned in some far-off time. By the end of the first century, Roman citizenship was so widespread that the situation described here was a relic of the past. Most folks were already citizens, and the specialness of citizenship had faded away. The whole shady business of acquiring and selling citizenship belonged squarely in the middle of the first century and nowhere else. But wait, there's even more historical confirmation at play here with Paul's arrest that shows that Acts wasn't written way late. In Acts 23, 1-5, we see Paul in a bit of a tough spot. He's hauled in front of the Jewish council and ends up getting slapped across the face by orders of Ananias, the high priest. Paul does not take it lying down, though. He calls out Ananias and says, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." Choice words. Well, the bystanders chime in, asking Paul if he's disrespecting the high priest. Paul's comeback might seem a little bit odd. He basically says, "Sorry guys, I didn't realize he was the high priest. You know the rules according to Moses. Don't badmouth your leaders." But here's where things get really interesting. Why didn't Paul recognize Ananias as the high priest? Well, as it turns out, there is a whole backstory to it. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, Ananias, son of Nebuchadnezzar, was high priest during Quadratus's time as the head honcho in Syria. Quadratus wasn't too pleased with some of Ananias' shady dealings, so off to Rome he went, bound and all, to explain himself to Claudius Caesar. Long story short, they all make it back to Jerusalem, but Ananias doesn't get his old job back. Jonathan takes over as high priest instead, but his tenure ends tragically with an assassination in the temple. Now, here's the kicker. After Jonathan's demise, there's a bit of a high priest vacuum until Ismail, the son of Phabi, gets the nod from King Agrippa. And guess what? This all happens right around the time of the events of Acts 23. So when Ananias pulls off the high priest act, the office is actually up for grabs. He just took it upon himself to play the part at this particular time, right when Paul was arrested. So when Paul says, "I didn't realize he was the high priest," it's because he's not. Paul's being cheeky. Because Ananias was just playing high priest, he's usurping power. But Luke doesn't delve into this historical drama in his account. You have to connect the dots from sources like Josephus, everything fits perfectly together, confirming Luke's accuracy. It seems pretty unlikely that some 2nd century writer trying to make up a fake history of the early church would just randomly stumble upon the specific incident Josephus talked about in just the right time frame, and then cook up a conversation where Paul casually mocks an unofficial high priest in such an incidental way. But then at the same time, we hear from a handful of Bible scholars that the author of Acts copies Josephus, but somehow he manages to bungle all sorts of details. I don't think that they can have it both ways. Those critics who claim Acts is just fan fiction without any real historical basis just couldn't be more off the mark. I hope you're finding this series helpful, and I'll have more historical confirmations in the Gospels and Acts in future videos, so be sure to do all the YouTube things, subscribe, sign up for notifications, and all that jazz, and stay tuned. Thanks for watching.